Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is McFarlane Friday. We're coming to a close with the McFarlane reviews. I have a few issues of the Incredible Hulk that he did that I bought recently at a pretty decent price at a recent comics haul. So I'll be covering those after this issue here. But basically, this is Spawn Batman and it is the last official full comic book that Tom McFarlane does. Kind of goes out with somewhat of a bang. It is I'm pretty sure a 48-page special, so it's a double-sized comic basically. Sorry, there's a hair floating around there. Again, like I said, what I'm pretty sure is his last official full comic book work in the early 90s. After that, he's done some pinups and stuff. He's done a few pages in some of the Spawn anniversary issues. More recently, not recently anymore, but with issue 300, I found out from a subscriber that he did a few pages in there. Went and checked them out. They're great. Pretty cool, but no backgrounds to be seen anywhere. Kind of pulling a Rob Liefeld there. But also, for another comment I got from someone was that Greg Capullo drew this one and McFarlane inked it. I mean, there's a few shots where there could be some question, but I think overall this is definitely a McFarlane work, and I'll point out why. Definitely he drew this cover for sure. The way, a telltale sign for McFarlane is, like I said, the somewhat wonky or cartoony anatomy occasionally, which I think looks great and adds to his style and makes him distinct, right? So some of the musculature on the arm here and the thighs, the Spawn thighs as well. Capullo just seems to be much more accurate when it comes down to the anatomy and less cartoony on that aspect of things. Also, there's a pinup at the end of this issue I'm going to mention now by Greg Capullo, a double-page splash. That is definitely indicative of his style at the time. It's him inking himself. So, when you compare the two styles, they're very contrasting at this point. Capullo's still more in kind of almost, I guess I'd call it the Jim Lee, maybe slightly Adam Kubert, Andy Kubert mold, and the Marvel look, the X-Men look, and he's slowly going to morph into the Greg Capullo we get to discover on Spawn, with McFarlane throwing his inks on top, helping out the aesthetic, and eventually him growing into his own and being inked by Danny Miki, who did an awesome job. Kind of pushed that aesthetic forward, I think. Pushed the McFarlane aesthetic forward, cleaned it up a little bit, but still kept it busy and interesting. Anyways, this story takes place officially in Dark Knight continuity because it is also a good selling point, written by Frank Miller. So at this point, the specter of Dark Knight Returns was still pretty fresh, had made a lot of impact in the comic book industry, and Frank Miller was still huge. So to get him doing Batman again was quite a coup, and this still near the end of maybe the comic book bubble of the early 90s. So this sold massively, millions of copies. It was a huge hit. And it actually was the first book after Dark Knight to take place in Dark Knight, Frank Miller, Batman continuity. And the cover definitely reflects that. Definitely an echo of Dark Knight Returns, right? If you know that super iconic cover. DC also published a version, which I bought back in the day. I don't know if I'm going to be reviewing it. It's by Klaus Janson and all the three Batman writers at that time. I kind of like the story. The stories, it's kind of indicative of comics at that time. The DC story is probably way better, but the art at the time I thought sucked. I really love Klaus Janson now, but back in the day, I don't know if I didn't like him, but I certainly didn't like him doing Spawn. I just found his style did not work at all with him drawing Spawn. He looks cool on Batman. I've always liked his Batman stuff. So that Gothic story that he did with Grant Morrison on Legends of the Dark Knight early on, that is a really great Batman story. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself or far away from the subject matter. So let's get back to Spawn Batman. We've talked about the cover. Let's have a look inside. And I'm going to try to kind of point out what I think is definitely McFarlane-isms in here. And even though Capullo, when he takes over Spawn, tries to incorporate some of those, still develops his own style and brings his own style that we don't get here in this comic. And that's why, that person who said that apparently Greg Capullo drew this, not sure I agree with that. Writer Frank Miller, artist Tom McFarlane, letterer Tom Orzechowski, colorist Steve Oliff, and the cover is actually colored by Kiko Taganashi, who went on to work with Extreme and was Rob Liefeld's favorite colorist. Does a great job too. The colors on this cover are really cool. And Steve Oliff always did a good job on Spawn, so it looks great here. There was something I wanted to say about the art. Yeah, so after Spawn Batman, you know, there's those 4 issues that I reviewed recently where McFarlane is credited as the artist, but those are the ones where I think actually Greg Capullo drew or did the layouts and stuff, and McFarlane inked on top to give it that McFarlane aesthetic and look. But this definitely, to me, all of it screams McFarlane. This kind of zooming out from the moon, right? These buildings back here, you know, the textures, all of this stuff that he would do in Amazing Spider-Man that we see here. Just the way he noodles in those hatching lines. All of this screams McFarlane. The extreme close-up of the eye, right? That one white panel. Like, all these panels are basically, you know, white or light, right? And again, interesting storytelling, and also deadline-wise, those are 3 panels he doesn't have to draw. You know, this one, I can imagine these 2 panels maybe took about 10 seconds, right? Very economical and smart storytelling from McFarlane, and in his own kind of inimitable style, right? So it works. I always like this idea, and he starts it off here right at the beginning. He'll do it throughout, where Batman literally becomes just a full shadow. Not a lot of artists, you know, there were 2 artists in the 90s that I remember really going for that, was Tom McFarlane and Joe Quesada. And then sometimes I see like certain, you know, this shot here is kind of reminiscent of a Joe Quesada. There's some overlap there, I think. I think both artists were probably looking at what they were doing and taking some stuff from that. There was also a promo ad for Spawn Batman, where Spawn and Batman were next to each other, and it was almost like, in a weird way, looked like origami or something, because it's both, you know, both silhouettes and their capes kind of just folding triangularly, as McFarlane does. I don't have a shot of it here, but if any of you remember that ad, right? So, good idea to give us a nice splash of Batman here, introduce the character. Looks really cool. Like I said, that he doesn't apply it all the way throughout the whole cape and body here, but a lot of silhouette on the face, and he'll do this thing, the McFarlane thing of just the eyes and the mouth, which I think looks pretty cool. And again, like I said, another artist who would do that was Joe Quesada. I think the interpretation of Batman here is pretty spot on, but again, still has enough McFarlaneisms to make him seem, I guess, slightly cooler in a 90s way, is how I'd put it. You know, it certainly seemed that way back then. Yeah, so here's a shot here. I copied this too, the way he draws Batman like this. Like, I copied that so much after this. But yeah, this shot here where it almost looks like 2D and flat and origami-like, right? Occasionally that's what the Spawn cape, and in this case the Batman cape, end up looking like. Here's a bit of awkward kind of body positioning, which I don't hate and I'm not against, right? When you get hit, you can tend to look awkward and stuff as you fall. But that's, I don't see Greg Capullo doing this kind of twisting of the body. That definitely looks like McFarlane. And these designs for these robots are McFarlane designs for sure. There's something in the different weight, I guess, from artist to artist. It's like, you know, the volume and the weights tend to be different, and McFarlane is a lot kind of balloonier and jumps around and stuff, and lighter, I guess, and Capullo just tends to be denser and harder. I'm not sure if everyone's understanding how I'm trying to describe this, but there you go. So Batman getting his ass kicked, and for some reason he just picks up some gloves that came out of a crate, and they're humming with power apparently. So he just figures out that he can use those gloves to power himself up. Batman's kind of dumb in this one, right? Like, Dark Knight Returns was cool, and then every subsequent kind of version of Batman that Frank Miller did just didn't seem as cool as the one in Dark Knight. I didn't think it was quite the same, you know, whether we're talking about this comic here, or whether we're talking about All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder. That's a mouthful. It was always kind of the dickier side of Batman in those ones, where in Dark Knight it was, I mean, there were parts where he was quite a dick, but not all the way throughout. I like this interesting use of Batman's kind of silhouette, just to transition from panels to the panels down here. And yeah, this sequence where he's basically, you know, figured out that the robot is being controlled by a human inside, right? But that it's just the head that's been attached. This is definitely McFarlane, right? The broken glass and stuff. A very McFarlane kind of way to draw that. Then we're introduced to this lady, right? And if you've seen RoboCop 2 or read a bunch of other Frank Miller stories, I can't pinpoint exactly which ones, but he's brought her back so many times, this kind of archetype character, this lady who's claimed to help homeless people, but really she's just putting their heads or their brains into robots. It's this concept that Frank Miller just rehashes very often. Does he do it in Hard Boiled? I'm not sure, but there's something else, I think. Either Hard Boiled or that thing he did with Simon Bisley. I think it's called Bad Boy. I have that. Yeah, it's just very weird. It's very weird, and he brings it back over and over. So if you go eventually and read through the Frank Miller library, you'll see that trope come back, and it's just recycling something, you know. It's kind of cheap. The lower lip there of the look of Batman, very McFarlane, very cartoony. Many more instances of, again, it makes sense with the deadline he probably had for this story as well, to deal with Batman as just a shape, and it looks cool and it works really well graphically. It's not like he's cheaping out when you get closer up and you see more of the detail of his costume and his cape and stuff. But you know, another example here with the silhouette, the shot here, definitely to me, I could almost, if you isolate this, I could believe that Joe Quesada drew that somewhere. There's a similarity in the size of the bat symbol and stuff. That there's, again, it seems like a weird reference, but definitely this too. There's an affinity again between both towards the way they draw Batman. This shot here, you know, the silhouette with the arm coming out that he used before, and yeah, Batman is a shape pretty much, you know, at least in half the images, I would say. So McFarlane obviously very good at using that iconic look of Batman. I definitely think this here is kind of an homage to or an homage to that shot of Batman in The Dark Knight Returns, the first issue, right, where he's talking to Commissioner Gordon, this building and stuff. Don't know if he literally lightboxed it or maybe just looked off, you know, as reference. Not sure exactly how he did that, but it looks really cool. Here he goes super angular, which I thought was kind of just fun and interesting with the cape. And Batman's in New York City, and he's, you know, hearing all these stories in the alleyways about a bum called Al, he says, right? But now and then he hears legends of one of their own named Al, a bum possessed with magic powers. Nonsense, he thinks. And then we get a cool shot of Spawn, right? Definitely McFarlane, the big thighs and stuff. The foreshortening is McFarlane style, the hands. So, yeah, again, I would say that I don't think Greg Capullo is doing this. Someone put a bit of blur on the chains there, which is very early 90s. Another thing I would mention is this background here, which I 100% think is lifted from Akira, right? And just kind of photostated in back then. Another trope here that is kind of odd, because I think this is the first time I encountered the idea of, you know, guys setting bums on fire. And I think it comes from a movie, and I could be mistaken, but I've never honestly seen Taxi Driver. I've heard it happens in there or something, but it comes from some movie for sure, right? It's that kind of trope. And then it gets, you know, I think it comes back in the Grant Morrison issues, which are just in around the same time as this. So when I review those, I'll make, you know, certain that I'm correct with that, but I'm pretty sure it happens. And I remember as a kid going, oh, these guys are copying themselves or repeating themselves. You know, I've never seen this concept, and all of a sudden I see it within a few short months. Weird bit of synergy there as well. But yeah, so the fire kind of runs around the bum and comes after them. And of course it's Al, right? The magic bum, who we know as Spawn, right? Pretty cartoony here, the bullet wounds on his, you know, where most times McFarlane will do stuff that's more gruesome. I guess this is a little more effective and time-saving when you're on a deadline, once again. So Spawn sets these guys on fire to teach them a lesson. And of course, Batman comes in and, as he says, a wanton act of murder. I hate that word, wanton act of murder. Very old school. And the line, even as a kid, I was like, oh, that's kind of cheesy. You must be Al. So, you know, Batman's inner dialogue to give you an idea of the Frank Miller dickish Batman version that we got here. There's one good thing about murderers. You don't feel bad about taking a cheap shot at them, like getting good momentum from a 30-foot drop and driving your heel into the murderer's kidney. Shouldn't cause too much damage. 6 months in the hospital, he'll be ready to face the judge. Now, if you thought Al was just a regular guy, even though he's dressed this way, probably would have killed him, right? So, some more grandiose Frank Miller stuff. This is my turf, Batman. Back off. Still got that white line coming down his arm in the Spawn design, which kind of looks weird here, right? Impossible. This Al, he should be just this side of crippled, but he pivots expertly, delivering a kick of his own that makes all the air leave Batman in a rush. So yeah, of course, we've got, you know, Batman and Spawn. They're going to fight. It's a crossover. Again, a lot of time-saving silhouettes for McFarlane, but end up looking cool. Again, like I said, this is the kind of stuff I copied as a kid. Of course, Spawn is a pretty formidable foe, even for Batman. And you know, body shape wise, it seems like Batman's reverting more and more into the thick kind of wrestler body that he had in Dark Knight Returns, right? And again, the Quesada McFarlane shield here that they both kind of do the really big one, I guess, is definitely attributable to Frank Miller once again, The Dark Knight. Like you see here, Batman's a bit more McFarlane-y. There's that silhouette again, all throughout. And the old McFarlane trick of, you know, just everything happening off panel and just getting a lot of sound effects. And he, as a visual, you know, center of interest, he just has the constant zoom on the bat symbol, right? Now both guys are just tired and beat up. I thought this here, you know, was a little weird as far as the inking goes. And I was like, is this maybe something Capullo did? Could be, but it still has enough McFarlane to convince me in the details and the inking and stuff. And also, you know, at this point, McFarlane's receiving pages from Capullo, some Spawn pages, so maybe he's taking some cues from stuff he sees in Capullo's artwork that he likes. So Spawn goes to investigate, you know, this, what do they call it? A junkie named Silvio led Spawn here. He seemed to know something. You can check in, said Silvio, but you can't check out. So some of the homeless people are disappearing, right? So Spawn thinks this is where it is. And of course, he encounters the same robots as Batman did earlier, right? And of course, you can't have Spawn, the ex-soldier, dead zombie soldier, without Spawn using guns, right? So I remember McFarlane saying, you know, 99, the first time Spawn showed up with guns, he's like, 99% of the time Spawn won't have guns, but he will in this storyline, right? And then eventually that idea of Spawn with guns and using his military training came back a whole bunch of times. And there were tons of times when Spawn became like Sniper Spawn and all that. A little detail here that I like with the cape, you know, he's not using such a straight line. He's using kind of a rhythm in the line that's similar to how he draws Mary Jane's hair in Spider-Man. I know that's a weird kind of correlation there, but yeah, it works well. I think on the Spawn cape, he does it here too, right? Just side, it's not quite a straight kind of line. It's a little trembly, I guess is how I'd put it. And then Spawn realizes that the lady who's taken on the screen here talking to these homeless robot dudes is some lady he remembers from back in the day when he was a soldier, right? Her voice is like music, hypnotizing. Then like a thunderclap, a fragment of memory, the memory of Al Simmons, soldier on some ghastly foreign battlefield. She was smiling. Men screamed and died, and she was smiling. Okay, so she enjoys war. We get a cool McFarlane vertical shot here, which I would almost venture to say is possibly not even drawn by him. This building is uncharacteristically not like Todd McFarlane. Or uncharacteristically McFarlane. I don't know what I'm saying, but I don't think he drew this building. This, the punk was holding back, humiliating. This sequence I thought was hilarious back when I was a kid. He's like, oh yeah, Batman's just, you know, he's putting band-aids and stuff around his gloves and his costume and on top of his cowl, which is kind of ridiculous. I think he's kind of going for a Sin City vibe and Marv or something, but yeah, I don't know if it quite works. It's a little, again, even though we're reading comics and they're already kind of ridiculous, that's an extra level of ridiculousness. So Spawn shows, Batman answers the bat signal, and of course it's not Commissioner Gordon, it's this lady waiting, and she's hypnotized Batman, of course, because she's got that power, and, you know, she's convinced, pretty easily, she's convinced Batman that she's the good guy, and that Spawn needs to be taken out. Batman's pretty dumb in this one, honestly. Spawn, in a weird way, is actually portrayed as much smarter than Batman. You know, he comes off that way anyways. So Batman comes back, of course. Pretty cool splash page there. He's gone to get one of those gloves, humming with the promise of power, right? That Frank Miller repeats over and over. And, of course, we get a second. So a lot of pages of this is just basically Spawn and Batman fighting, which I guess they figured that's what the kids want to see, right? That's what the kids like. Some cool kind of almost fully silhouette work up here, which I think is cool and looks good. Seeing a lot of blood come out of Batman's mouth is kind of rare as well, especially in DC Comics. You're not getting too much of that. Yeah, just two guys just beating the crap out of each other. I always thought this shot was pretty cool here of Spawn punching down, right? And the angle that we've got from behind Batman's butt, I think is done pretty well. Another shot here kind of reminds me of Joe Quesada. And then he kind of pulls a Dark Knight trick here as well, something similar to what Miller did in Dark Knight, where Now that he's all beat up, it almost looks like, you know, the costume is a little more realistic in the sense that it's someone wearing a costume instead of being more of a kind of a shadow or silhouette. He's just an actual dude in a costume, almost back to Adam West, right? And in Dark Knight, once he kind of fights the Joker and stuff, it seems like his costume's even more full of folds and ill-fitting. So I feel like that's probably where McFarlane gets it here. And Batman's been, you know, beaten, trashed so severely he can't fight back, and his his jaw shatters like glass here, and then boof, an artery burst. The robot, you know, a mortal wound. Kind of an odd story point, because basically what happens is, you know, Spawn helps him out, and basically, you know, they kind of do some Spawn magic mind meld thing, which allows McFarlane to just draw this abstract thing. Few color holds. This was probably done really quickly. I'd say about 15-20 minutes, and you're through with a page. And everything just basically happens in the narration here, where they're inside each other's minds, right, and sharing their story, I guess, you know. And Spawn is able to convey to Batman that, you know, this lady's a bitch and she's evil. All of this design work, though, is just classic McFarlane, and it's the last kind of bits that we're going to get of this kind of stuff. So I'm kind of soaking it in here. I think it looks good. And basically, Batman does die, and Spawn saves him. There was a lot of controversy back then over this whole thing that, you know, well, Spawn shouldn't be able to kill Batman. Batman's so smart. There's the thing, is like, you know, there's an out for this. Again, that it's Frank Miller's Batman version, right from The Dark Knight. And again, I will just say that Batman just, you know, in regular Spawn continuity and regular Batman continuity, I would expect Bruce Wayne to be smarter than Spawn. Although Spawn's probably not that stupid. He was a special Secret Service, whatever, special ops soldier, whatever you want to call it, right, under Jason Wynn. So you can't be an idiot to do that stuff. But I would expect Batman to be a little bit smarter, I guess. And there's a hint of it here, which kind of doesn't make sense with his characterization. But yeah, he's just pretty dumb. Last cool double page splash we're gonna get from McFarlane in a comic, right? So soak it in. It's Spawn and Batman. I always thought Batman or Spawn's position was kind of weird. Batman, I think, is just pitch perfect and looks really cool. So yeah, onto this yacht where this lady's talking about her whole program and how now she's, you know, basically the problem is people. I thought this was interesting, right? So there is a faction of the elite and the rich people who kind of believe this out there. People you've never heard about. The problem is people. People sweating, farting, meat-eating, land-destroying, cruel, stupid, murderous people. People sprawling across the planet, cluttering its natural perfection with endless flesh, countless factories and dinners, and mini malls and toxic waste dumps and concentration camps. With a rumble, a 12-ton hatch glides open. People committing endless horrors, ruining everything. The problem is people. In the hold, an arsenal, built for a war that was never fought. A hush falls over the crowd. Two generals trade high fives. And we stand on the brink of a great destiny, my friends. We have a glorious opportunity to usher in a new world, a world free of pain and fear and war and crime and all the other evils of human willfulness. And all it will take is a war that will grow and grow until the fire is everywhere. Then, when the fires have died, our historic work will truly begin. Using a trinity of methods, therapy, technology, and force, we will offer freedom from choice to every living soul. Great. We will free the world. We will heal the world with these weapons of war here, these nuclear warheads, basically, right? It's kind of an interesting idea. And there's still a mind meld there, so you've got both guys kind of arguing as they go through this mission here. Again, here's another quick shot where I find Spawn doesn't look like McFarlane usually draws him, so maybe something happened here with some help and other artists and stuff, although I would still tend to think that most of this looks pretty McFarlane-y. This shot of Batman here I always thought looked, again, not very McFarlane. There's just something to it that was off. And yeah, again, we just got more of Spawn and Batman, you know, fighting and destroying stuff. Spawn grabs a gun again. This shot here, right, again, harkens back to stuff Joe Quesada would do, and even a bit of Mike Mignola mixed in there. So yeah, through all the chaos on this yacht, one of this debris here, the piece of a robot or something, you know, stabs this woman. So my dreams, a better world, a paradise. So she had the detonator here. So the warheads are shot off of this yacht here. Spawn grabs Batman in a very chummy pose, and they teleport onto the nuke. And basically, both of them. So it's a mess, redundant circuitry. So they're looking at the circuitry to disarm it, right? Watch it. I know this model. That's not a redundancy. It's a trick. Touch it wrong and everybody dies. I won't touch it wrong. And don't you touch my cape ever. Nobody touches my cape. Just, yeah, some of this dialogue. I like this line here, though. And this is, again, this points to Batman being smart, but it's the only bit that does. The characterization all throughout kind of makes him fairly dumb. Genius at work. A mind so brilliant it might have revolutionized the field of physics. Hands so skilled they could have served a concert pianist or a safecracker. Batman. Detective vigilante. Savior. He's doing a bit of Rob Liefeld here, where he's telling you about what Batman is through the narration, not showing you. But yeah, so they're able to disarm the nuke, and Spawn teleports just in time, you know, and Batman is still giving him the shitty Frank Miller attitude. I don't have the power in hand to bring you down right now, boy, but I'll get it, and we'll meet again. And Spawn actually says something pretty sensible here. He's the most sensible, rational character in here, when usually, I don't know if he is in his comic. Would you just knock it off for just 1 second? You and me, we just saved the whole city, made the whole world. When the chips were down, we wound up on the same team, and neither of us could have pulled this off alone. What do you say we just bury the hatchet? And Batman throws something at him, bury this. And we get this iconic splash moment, and the last bit of Tom McFarlane art in a regular Tom McFarlane comic, and that is it. And of course, he's going to work that into the regular Spawn storyline, where he used the shoelace to close up the face, where he first mentioned some guy in black does it to him, which we're to assume is Batman. But then we find out with those missing issues that were printed later, 18, 19, 20, I believe, with Houdini and stuff, that's where it happened. So kind of a weird retcon. Does have more impact, I think, if you just leave it being Batman and just not mentioning Batman specifically. Of course, for all the licensing and rights reasons that you wouldn't, you know. So, you know, Image has a license to do Batman for this comic and this comic only, obviously. So yeah, so here's the Greg Capullo double page splash, and as you can see, you know, the inking, the finishing is still much more kind of West Coast Jim Lee-ish than it'll become with McFarlane inking on top of him. Great stuff, and of course, it still has the great, you know, Greg Capullo structure, anatomy, layout, you know, foreshortening, all that stuff that he's really good at, but still not with the McFarlane aesthetic, right? His Spawn will get a lot cooler even within the first few issues of him drawing the title. And then we get this great splash, which was also the cover to Wizard, and I was disappointed by this one just because the colors, I just much prefer the Wizard cover colors. This one's, they're kind of dark and muted and just not my thing. All right, the sun's coming out, and it's going to start making my comics look a little weird on the screen. So that is my review of Spawn Batman, guys, and Tom McFarlane's last official continuous comic book. If you have any comments or concerns about this issue or about the channel, let me know in the comments below. If you are subscribed and you're still watching, thank you so much for still being there. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes about a second, and it really helps us out, helps the channel grow, and helps get us out there to other people who are into comics just like we are. So everyone out there, thank you so much for your time and your attention, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.